Good evening, I'm Alan Jackson. Welcome to Nashville. It's been more than a year since the brutal Hamas attack on the Jews at the Nova Music Festival, a year of tears and mourning, but also a year of pushing back, not just in Gaza, but in Lebanon and Iran as well. In this country, it's also been an extremely challenging year, since the U.S. and Israel have a strong relationship and a rich history. But from the college campuses to the streets to the businesses and even neighborhoods, our Jewish community in the States has been under attack. No one is giving up, and in some cases, it's made our Jewish allies even stronger, more ready to fight back, it seems. Which brings us to our guest tonight. Joining us right here in Nashville, E.J. Kimball, the Director of the Interfaith Outreach and Engagement, and Natalie Sanandaji, who survived the attack at the Nova Music Festival and is now a public affairs officer. Both work for the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Natalie, I want to start, I think, with the most obvious. We want to know how you're doing. You've had over a year now since that horrific attack at Nova. Tell us how you are.
I feel very fortunate, especially since about a month after the attacks, I started working for the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, and working with them and speaking out on the news and interviewing has given me the opportunity to take something horrible that happened to me and try to turn it into something good. A lot of the work we do is with interfaith relations, and I'm just trying to build a better future.
Well, I have been there. I mean, I've walked through that field, and then I've walked through the streets of those communities that were so traumatized by that horror. And I want you to, the compassion we have for what you've been required to overcome, I think is amazing. The courage you and the Israeli community has demonstrated for the whole global community. To see the way you have overcome that is truly remarkable.
Thank you.
It's a gift to all of us.
Thank you very much.
I think more people in this country need to hear your story, because the support from this country has been unfortunately mixed, something your prime minister was not hesitant about addressing.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening on America's college campuses is horrific. Anti-Semitic mobs have taken over leading universities. They call for the annihilation of Israel. They attack Jewish students. They attack Jewish faculty. This is reminiscent of what happened in German universities in the 1930s. It's unconscionable. It has to be stopped. It has to be condemned, and condemned unequivocally. But that's not what happened. The response of several university presidents was shameful.
I really want to hear from both of you on this. I was shocked at what happened here in the States on our university campuses. Did you expect that? Did you understand that was coming, or was that as much of a shock to you as it was to me? Natalie, you tell us first, but I want you both to comment.
I started interviewing just about 4 days after the attacks, and the reason why to me it felt so necessary to do so is because I completely expected this reaction from the world, unfortunately. I knew that very soon, right after the attacks, there was a little bit of silence, and then I knew very soon the world would start attacking us. And that's why I wanted to interview. I wanted to put a face to the statistics. And I hoped that through interviewing, people would see me and think to themselves, you know, this could have been my daughter, this could have been my friend. I feel that it's harder to see a face and then to flat out say, these attacks were justified, the rape was justified, the killing was justified. So I did expect it, and that's why it was so important for me to start interviewing right away.
You know, EJ, I've lived in Israel. I studied at the university there, so I have some awareness. But I wasn't prepared for what boiled up on these campuses. Were you surprised by that?
Unfortunately, I was not. Wow. As an organization, we were started in February 2019. And we were started because we saw that there were areas in fighting anti-Semitism that weren't getting the attention they needed, and a major area was on college campuses. This issue was there for years. It's been cultivated for generations on these college campuses, and it was masked under the guise of free speech when they would shut down speakers who had viewpoints that they didn't agree with, whether it was conservative voices, whether it was IDF or former IDF soldiers coming to campus to talk. So when October 7th happened, and 24 hours later, you've got protests starting on college campuses. Sadly, it wasn't a shock to me, but to you and to many people, it was a complete shock that this was happening. But October 7th was not the cause for the protests on college campuses. October 7th was the excuse to launch this movement on college campuses, because they are siding with a terrorist organization, not standing up for the rights of the Palestinian people. They were standing up for a terrorist organization aiming to commit genocide against the Jewish people.
Well, what was shocking was these high-profile universities, I won't call them elite any longer, but these high-profile schools had clearly been creating propaganda in their students. They weren't informed. They didn't even understand what they were chanting. They've just been mobilized along an ideology of hate. And they're paying enormous amounts of money to be programmed in a very disgusting way. So do you think we can change the nature of these campuses? What do we have to do to turn that around?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to turn this around is leadership. We saw it at certain universities where college presidents would come out and say, this is not okay on our campus. We are going to stand up and protect the rights of Jewish students, and not just Jewish students, but those that are supporting Israel. Right. Versus these, former elite universities where their college presidents were afraid to speak the truth, which is that activity, those actions are reprehensible and should be violating their codes of conduct and should be called out immediately and shut down. Those were creating a hostile environment for Jewish students and would not have been tolerated against any other minority group on their campus.
That's absolutely true.
It's an issue of leadership, and it's something that we've seen as a major failure at a lot of these universities.
And when we allow it in the universities, that it infects the broader culture, because the students absorb that propaganda and go out into the marketplace with that hate planted in their soul. I think a recent example of that was so clear, while the IDF was mapping out a strategy to respond to Iran, their plans were leaked from the Pentagon. I mean, that is anti-Semitism on display, but no doubt those seeds planted in some elite university. How does that feel to the Jewish community when the Pentagon is leaking Israel's battle plans?
It's very dangerous. And one of the biggest challenges from that leak was the trust between the United States and Israel. I mean, the United States and Israel are, Israel is one of the United States' closest ally, and certainly the closest ally in the region. And when Israel cannot trust that these conversations at high levels will be kept secret, it disturbs that trust, and it's not just a threat for Israel in the region, but imagine now if Israel is carrying out these actions against Iran and the United States is partially in the dark about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and the risk that that could potentially pose to our troops in the region. So it's a very dangerous situation, and you're right, what starts on the college campuses, all those people there, they go out and have jobs, and it permeates into their daily lives.
Well, you're both very gracious. It doesn't just disturb trust, it's a breach of trust. And that has to be identified, rooted out. We can't tolerate it and accept it. It's just not okay. When we come back, we'd like to hear what it was like for you, Natalie, on October the 7th. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back now with E.J. Kimball, the Director of Interfaith Outreach and Engagement, and the Public Affairs Officer, Natalie Sanandaji. They both now work to combat anti-Semitism. Natalie, can you take just a few minutes and tell us about your experiences on October 7th? We've seen the news clips, but I'm sure what your experiences were dramatically different.
So me and my friends arrived at the festival at around 1 a.m. And typically with festivals like these, they go anywhere from 24 hours to 3 days. So you bring camping gear with you, you bring sleeping bags and tents. And after a few hours of dancing, me and my friends decided to rest for a few hours and wake up for the sunrise set of the festival, which is supposed to be the most exciting part. And instead of waking up to the sound of the sunrise set music, we woke up to the sound of rockets. And for me, when I started interviewing, one of the most important things for me to point out to American audiences is the way we were woken up. So one of our friends was on the dance floor when the first rockets were intercepted, and she knew that we were sleeping, and she wanted to come wake us up and make sure we were alert to the situation. So she came and she was smiling, and she kind of nudged us awake, and she was like, "Good morning, guys. I just wanted you to know a few rockets were intercepted overhead, but it's fine. It's normal for the area that we're in. You know, it's the holidays. They like to do this on the holidays. I'm sure it's just going to be a few. It'll pass and the party will continue. So, like, nothing to worry about. Just wanted you guys to be awake." And I try to tell people, you know, imagine a festival happening in California. Imagine Coachella Festival. And imagine people are dancing and suddenly rockets are intercepted over their heads. There's no way that they would react in such a calm manner. But for Israelis, unfortunately, this is their reality. This is something they deal with on a semi-regular basis. But I started counting the rockets, and eventually we start to realize this is a way more serious situation than what we originally thought. The security tells us to evacuate. We start heading to our cars. After a few minutes of trying to drive out, it's thousands of people trying to drive at the same time. We're driving very slowly, and security starts yelling at us to get out of our cars and start running. And we couldn't understand why they would tell us to run from rockets, but we figured, you know, we should listen to them. So we pull our car over, and right after we pull our car over, that's when we hear the first gunshots. And from there, we ran for about 4 hours, running from Hamas terrorists, running from gunshots. And one of the main questions I got asked was how I knew what direction to run to, how I knew what decisions to make to save my life. And the answer is that nobody knew. And there's a phrase that Holocaust survivors coined when it came to life and death situations and how they knew what decisions to make. And they coined a phrase called a choiceless choice. And basically the meaning is that in these life and death situations, you don't have much time to try to assess what decision is going to be the better decision, which one will save your life as opposed to getting you killed. But you have to make a decision in that moment. And all the decisions we made while running from the Hamas terrorists were choiceless choices. And I'll just end with an example of the main choiceless choice that will always stick with me. About 3 hours into running, we passed by a group of friends that were hiding in a ditch. And they called us over and they told us to come hide with them. And we start crawling into this ditch, and there's maybe 10 of them in this giant ditch in the ground. And one of the 3 friends I came with, he was standing on top of the ditch. He didn't crawl in with us. And he looks down at all of us in this ditch, laying in this ditch, and he starts freaking out. He starts yelling at us that this is a horrible idea, and that if the Hamas terrorists find us, we're sitting ducks. They're going to come from above us and kill us all. And he said our only option for survival is to continue running. So we got out, we continued to run. And unfortunately, for the 10 or 15 friends that we left behind in that ditch, we found out a day or two later that none of them had made it out alive. And that's just one of the many examples of choices we made, whether it was turning left or right, whether it was choosing to hide or continue to run. And I consider myself very lucky to be here and to be able to speak to you. But I'm speaking out on behalf, not just of my story, but I'm speaking out on behalf of all of those who didn't make it and all those who no longer have a voice. So I want to say thank you for having me and allowing me to speak on their behalf.
Well, we're honored to have you. I have many friends, or have had many friends, who were Holocaust survivors. And their voices have been so important to help with a number of decisions from that day until this. And your voice is important. We can't afford to forget. And I thank you for your courage, because I know this isn't easy.
Thank you.
But it really leads me to my next question. You know, it's been reported that Hamas influence has been building in the U.S. for a long time. And it's out of the public eye for the most part. Americans aren't aware. We don't live with the awareness of rockets. But that it surfaced when these organized campus groups and others began appearing so quickly all over our country following that October attack. Well, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, has spoken openly about the potential for real trouble, not in Israel now, but in the United States.
There was already a heightened risk of violence in the United States before October 7th. Since then, we've seen a rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations call for attacks against Americans and our allies. And given those calls for action, our most immediate concern has been that individuals or small groups will draw some kind of twisted inspiration from the events in the Middle East.
Well, the reports show that this campus chaos was created by a group called American Muslims for Palestine, incubated, funded, and directed by the Students for Justice in Palestine. EJ, what more can you tell us about that? Is it a real threat here?
It is a real threat here. And the American Muslims for Palestine is actually currently being sued in Virginia, specifically because of their connection to previous organizations that were documented to be part of the Hamas support network in the United States. And we're talking about groups in the United States in the 90s and in the 80s. And this movement really started in the United States. You could even go back into the early 1960s when the Muslim Brotherhood group, which started in Egypt, came to the United States. And the Hamas organization is considered the Muslim Brotherhood group in Palestine. So they are part of this Muslim Brotherhood movement. So this is something that's been happening in the United States for years. There have been ebbs and flows with the influence of it, but this is 100% part of that support network. And we're seeing not just what's happening today, but we're seeing the years of activity that's led to what we're seeing today.
Natalie, there's a quote I want to ask you about. When I read it, it really touched my heart. You said that your mother taught you that holding a grudge and hating someone is like drinking poison and then expecting the other person to get hurt. Well, while Hamas and Hezbollah need to be stopped, hating the whole group of people isn't going to solve the problem. Can you tell us what you're doing, explain that quote, and how you're living that out?
So, as I said before, I feel very fortunate that since the attacks, I've had the opportunity to start working for the Combat Anti-Semitism movement and take something horrible that happened to me and try to turn it into something good. And doing that good is building bridges, and building bridges between our community and the Muslim community. Because going and hating, it's not going to fix what happened. It's not going to change what happened. You can't change the past. You can only change the future. And that's my goal, is to change the future. And I really have my mom to thank for that type of point of view that she's given me, that I've been able to carry with me and go on through my life, not hating. Because it's easy to hate. You can easily hate someone that did something like that to you, but you have to understand that a whole group of people is not Hamas. They're not all Hamas. They don't have the same ideologies. And even when it comes to the people of Gaza, I don't hate all of them. I don't blame all of them. I try to put myself in their shoes. I try to imagine if I was born into that culture, into that society, if I was brainwashed from such a young age, would I think differently? Would I break out of it, or would I follow suit? And the answer is you can't know.
Well, I appreciate your courage, and both of you for your voice. It's important not only to remember what our friends in Israel, but remember what we have to do in the United States to keep us all safe. Thank you both for joining us today. We want to stay in touch in the years ahead. And in a moment, I'm going to share some of my own thoughts. In the book of Romans, chapter 12, we're given some life advice, not to be overcome by evil, but to overcome evil with good. When we hear a story as horrific as what happened in Israel on October the 7th, I think it's easy to be focused on the evil. But I want to bring you back to the assignment that we have to overcome evil with the good in us. In that way, we can pray for the peace of Jerusalem, stand with our friends in Israel. We don't want to deny that evil exists. We just have to be determined not to let hatred grow in our heart, that we can't respond to evil with more evil, that we have to realize that there is good. Goodness comes from God, and the people of faith, we can overcome that evil by expressing God's goodness in our world. With that, I assure you there's more reasons for hope than despair. Hey, I'll be back in just a moment. Thank you for joining us tonight for this most important story. We didn't have a chance to read your emails, but please remember, if you haven't yet, take a moment to send us your thoughts. You can do that at comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do a lot to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.